I'll just use a friction tool to tighten that up. You could just as easily use anything you like, the edge of a rule or anything to tighten that up. It only needs to be finger tight, not much more really. And that brings us to the front group here. Now I want to clean the old grease away from that, so I might dismantle this from the mount to start off with. Remove those 3 small screws. And then it's a bit awkward getting this back together once you've removed them, but it can be done. But it allows me better access to those threads which I need to clean with a bit of naphtha. Now I'm just wanting to remove that old grease, because the old grease will have dried out to some extent, but it'll also be carrying dust and other contaminants that it's picked up. I'll just clean that, and I can check the fit in the centre group. Check that it will engage the thread and it will run down smoothly. Yeah, it does. That screws in easily. That's good. And it runs nice and smoothly too. So there's no problem with that. So I'll clean the glass. Can't tell whether that's a thread of cotton or a mark in the coating there. I'm just going to have a little close look at that. It was a thread of cotton. I'll clean this lens. I'm just using normal domestic glass cleaner here, nothing exotic. And I've got the window light from my right coming in here that I can judge from the reflections on the lens whether I've got it clear or not, clean. This is held in with a retainer ring into the mount. If it was a problem to clean in the mount, you could undo the retainer ring, take that glass out and clean it separately. But I don't see any need to do that in this case. I'll clean that front surface. It's not hard to clean lenses, it's harder, in order for them to function well, it's harder to get them cosmetically looking pretty, because if they have any sort of smear on them, it's like a rainbow smear that you see. It's probably not going to have any effect on your photos, but it doesn't look good. You're always trying to get them as clean as possible. Yeah, that runs in nicely. That's fine. So I can clean this mount and put that back together now. And here all I'm doing is just removing any dust or grease that might be in the mount. It's got a conical internal surface there which must bear on, yeah, that surface there, that pulls up tight on that surface. Okay, That's good. I know which way round that goes now. Now, are they symmetrically placed? They're not. Oh, I had it in the wrong place, did I? No, they're not. You think if you're making things like that, that the holes would have been placed symmetrically. They were not. What a funny thing to do. Okay, let's see if I can get these screws back in place. It would help if I put that on the right way round, wouldn't it? What have I done? You've got that back to front. That's it. See if I can get these screws in. Boy, these are small. I wouldn't want to lose one of these. Okay, I don't want these screws tight because I won't be able to screw the lens in if I've got them tight. That's better. Okay, so that's good. That unit's ready to go in there. I'm just going to make sure I've got every last tiny smear off that lens before I put it in. And I can just see one in the edge there. Let's see if that'll go. Yep. This lens is a Reassembly lens. It's their triplet. The Xenars that you have on the retinas have the same aperture. They would be a 4-glass lens. That screw's a bit loose there on that settings knob. I'll just tighten that up while I'm here. That screw head is a little bit damaged. Somebody's had a poke at that with something they shouldn't. I didn't want to tighten up. What's going on? Yeah, that seems okay now. That screw's just about bottomed out, but it doesn't tighten. It's not tight, which means probably that the plastic has shrunken back over time or something. Okay, so I want to get this screwed in here. I'm going to use some synthetic grease on that lens thread, and I'll just put a little bit on the female side here. You don't need to pack the threads. The only advantage in packing threads with thick grease is if the thread is very worn and things just do not, that they rattle in the mount. Okay, so that should go. Now I should be able to start that using a friction tool. Let's see if that's started. I'll just do these screws up lightly. Now it is. Okay. Let's back those screws out, run that down with a friction tool. There we go. It's down too far, I can tell. It binds up. We'll leave it right there for the moment. That adjustment will have to be made once it's on the camera. It does move smoothly. That all looks good. What have we got at the back to worry about? Oh, we've got all sorts here, yeah. We've got our shims. Now this one's split. It's a paper shim and two metal shims. I'll just clean these with a bit of naphtha. And the paper shim, I'll just make sure that that goes back between the metal shims so that it's protected in the fight to get the lens back in position. Really all I'm interested in is seeing that making sure there's no oil on this that would soak its way through to the shutter and cause me grief. That's not quite lined up. Let's see if I can get that to part company, and that's better. Yeah. The paper shim is slightly damaged because it wasn't lined up correctly with the locating pin. There's a locating pin on the back of the shutter right here. So normally I would put the thin shim on there, put the paper shim on there. This I still want to deal with a tiny bit of heat shrink around that bottom edge. And the heavier shim I'll put on the outside, and that'll just protect everything, keep everything in place. Okay, I better put a bit of heat shrink on that tube now, that contact now. Only a very short piece, and then I'll be ready to go. I've got to mount this to the camera after that. Well, time to put the front of the camera back together really. Now the shutter release is easy, because it can only go in one way. There's no problem with that, so I'll just put a little drop of grease on the end of that, fit that down to the little hole in the body, and that's fine. The coupling gear at this end that couples to that little rack inside the camera, that's a bit trickier, and that's trickier because we don't know where it needs to be timed relative to the shutter. But if I look at the shutter, This is the shutter here in the uncocked state. The flat side is towards the is pointing straight up, so if I get that in that position I should be about right. Let's see if we can get that seated in the hole. Now that's slightly that way. Let's try one, see if it'll move one notch. What's one tooth look like there? That's sitting straight up and down now. We'll try the shutter in there and see if that works. It may do. Did that cock? It did. Try that again. Okay, so that's correct. I've got the position of that shaft correct. I'll just hold that in place while I lift that shutter off so I don't disturb it. Now I can put the retainer plate in place for that. Now I'll put, here's the retainer plate. I'll just put a little wipe of grease around there and there. And this must sit here. There are two screws that hold that in position. Tighten those up. Now we have the front plate here, and that has two screws. One, what have I done with the other one? Did it fall on the floor? I bet it did. Give me one for my spares, I can't be bothered chasing. That one will do. Just get this retainer shim in place on the back of the shutter correctly. You can see that's going to be a nuisance. So the flash connection we need to get connected up. We've got a little contact there. Get that in place and do the screw up, hopefully. Yeah, that's firmly in place. See if I can get my shutter positioned. I'm not getting the cocking piece in at the top correctly there. Just trying to look from the top to see if the release is falling into place. No, it's not. Is the cocking piece falling into place? Is that it? Let's hold it there and see if that's it. And if I have something long enough to release the shutter. No, that's not cocked. Something's holding this up, it's not going back into position. Oh, I think it's our shims. They're falling out of position and stopping it from fitting. Hang on a minute, it might be fine. I may just need my shutter release shaft in there. That goes through a tiny hole in the body. That is in place. Okay, let me get my shims in position and then button this up. That is cocking correctly. Now I was fooled there because I was using a long screwdriver to hit the release, but actually it needed to go through a narrow hole in order to reach the release, and I hadn't taken that into account. That should be it. Let's get that in place. That's it. I can fit the retaining ring in place. We should be good to go. And the retaining ring is here. Hopefully that'll pick up easily. Because I don't have a convenient spanner for this particular one. Well, that's about there. Well, the adjustment of that's quite not good because that certainly released the film far before the shutter fired. So let's try that further around there. Of course, I haven't got the spring on the shutter release, so that's causing me grief. Yeah, it's still releasing the film before it got to the shutter release. Let's just take that round a bit further. Yeah, still doing the same. Need a bit more on here. That's closer. That's the film releasing first. What I'm trying to do is get the point at which it releases the film advance and the point at which it releases the shutter to be simultaneous. That's about it, I think. Okay, well that's good. So the shutter release, I need the spring on that. It's got a return spring. And getting this in place without losing anything could be tricky. Excuse me. Where was I before I was so rudely interrupted? Oh yeah, getting this shutter release and spring in place. So this I'll give a wipe with a bit of molybdenum paste so it moves smoothly. I'll fit its spring in position, and then with the camera on its side I'll slide that down into place. That's good, that's where it needs to be. That's all good. So that part appears to be fine. I'll be getting the top of the camera all finished and sorted out now. And the last thing I want to do is set the focus at the front of the camera. Of course, we don't have to worry about adjusting rangefinders or anything complicated like that, because of course the camera doesn't have anything like that. But we do have a shutter that works nicely. Let's see if the self-timer sets and fires correctly. Oh, it's sounding promising. Does the shutter work correctly on B? That's the next thing. It does. Okay. Right. Think about getting the top of the camera prepared. I'm just looking at this meter. Now that dial is a bit stiff, which suggests that the grease here is a bit sticky, so I'm going to have to pull that apart.